So people have asked why the Dear Esther's set on a Hebridean island. What's really interesting about this is one of those times when your kind of aspirations as an artist and the practical realities kind of dovetail. We knew that we had to have some way of limiting the player from disappearing off the play space, and when we made the original, it was a mod, and because it was a Half-Life 2 mod, you kind of had Eastern European city, spaceship, or blasted, desolate landscape, were your three options if you didn't want to start making any other assets. So it started off with these practical constraints.
One of the things you're always trying to do as a composer is create memorable themes. And a slight confession is that probably the most memorable theme, which is Remember in Dear Esther, wasn't actually created for the game. Rob's looking shocked. So it was actually from a piece of choral music that I'd written years before, based on a Christina Rossetti poem called Remember. And one of the things I was talking about earlier was how I didn't have any budget. So I had this piece of choral music, and I thought, hang on, this is absolutely perfect for Esther, but I don't want to use all of it. So the only bit that you actually get in the game is the first line of the choral piece of music. But that actually went on to form the main theme of the music that I wrote. And I think for me it's really interesting about how things that you've written earlier, years before, sometimes come in really, really useful and fit. So I always tell people and students not to despair if something doesn't get used or doesn't work at the time, because actually there'll come a place or in a time where you think, hang on a minute, I've got something that fits. So in terms of that memorable theme, the Remember theme gets used in multitude of different ways during the game. And one of the things it does is helps you to identify the kind of psychic place that you're in the game. So the theme is played in lots of different ways, and actually you'll notice that as you go through the game, it becomes more and more broken and more manipulated and broken down as the player goes through the journey and as you're psychologically struggling to get to the end point in the game. So music's really, really useful for highlighting the psychological mood. And we talk a lot about psychogeography, which always sounds a bit pretentious, but actually I think it's really important to what the three of us did in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, maybe you want to talk a bit about that.
Like the core kind of idea about psychogeography, if you're not in, the place you're in is not the place you're in, or you create the place you're in. It's not just as you're here and then the landscape's out there, but you don't navigate like a city by street signs and by those kind of formal things. You navigate it by the things which are significant to you in the way that you've lived in that space. And I think that was really kind of key to, I think it's really central to how the fusion of art and story and music come together in Dear Esther, because it's not a place where we're going, right, we have to lead the player up here because it's a natural formation, and then you would naturally have a piece of music here because you come around the corner. But the story, music and art all work around the idea of what's going on in the narrator's head at this point. How do we represent his emotional state relative to this landscape? And again, it's that idea of the game is, it's a dream of a place. It's like the idea of it being a fever dream or a coma dream, which obviously ties in a lot with the kind of story, and we'll come back to in a lot more detail when we get to the caves a bit later on.